under these key concepts, norms, counter norms, and to connect it, as he himself gave some hints about this, to connect them with ontological proof, especially with Gödel's ontological proof. I would like to start with the proposal by von Wright and elaborated by Berislav further, that obligation and permission are not interdefinable. As they state, these concepts are in a normative, not in a conceptual relation. As stated by von Wright, even to declare non-prohibited permitted is a normative act. I would like to describe Žarnich's approach and results and apply them to open questions about Gödel's ontological proof, that is, formal system, GO. In addition to von Wright, Berislav was also partly inspired by Gödel's formalization of the third order concept of positivity in GO. So the question arises, in light of this non-interdefinability of obligation and permission, what is exactly permission if we cannot logically reduce it to obligation? Berislav proposes a two-sets approach. So we have just in the previous talk by Gabriela Basic heard about this, and so I will have some easier task to clarify this approach. So we have to distinguish two sets: obligation norm set, so the set of explicitly promulgated norms, and a counter set, counter N, of sentences of some propositional language, so that we can define phi is permitted if and only if non-phi is in counter N, counter norm set, and non-phi is permitted if and only if phi is a member of the counter set. Now, instead of postulates, instead of interdefinability between obligation and permission, Berislav proposes continuing von Wright's ideas, he proposes postulates for the interrelationship between norms and counter-norms. That is, relative perfections. Getlessness as one perfection, relative perfection, and external consistency as another one. Further, Berislav Žarnich analyzes logical properties of a norm set and a counter set in terms of filter and ideal. Filter contains verum not falsum, is closed under implication and conjunction. Ideal contains falsum not verum, and is closed under implicit and under conjunction. Just to remember this. Obligation norm set, even if it is closed under consequences and the filter, can be incomplete, in which case its counter set should contain a tautology and therefore cannot be an ideal, but only what Berislav defines as a weak ideal. So it is actually closure under implicant and under at least one conjunct. Another property, obligation norm set, even if closed under consequences, can be anti-coherent, that is explosive, and hence classically implying also falsum, and hence is not a filter, in which case its counter set cannot contain falsum, and so can be only a weak ideal. For comparison, Gödel's ontological third-order property, third-order term of positivity of properties in his system GO is complete and consistent, and its counter set, defined as the rest of properties, is an ideal. Now, as Verisov proceeds further, standard deontic postulates can be translated into perfections of norm set and counter set. Let us take deontic axiom D. If phi is obligatory, then phi is permissible, actually. If we translate this postulate in terms of norm set, we get expression of consistency. If we translate it in terms of counter set, we get expression of completeness. And this as required perfections. These perfections are perfections for a norm giver, because a norm giver determines the core content of norms. For a norm recipient, they are only descriptive of norms. Completeness of counter N is achievable for a norm giver in general in two ways. We have heard also about this in a previous lecture by Gabriela Bašić. So by permitting the non-forbidden, so simply the procedure add to counter N what is not in N, which is closed under consequences. The second option, forbidding the non-permitted, is actually, according to Verislav, not rational, because it does not imply a unique normative ideal state. For example, if neither phi nor non-phi is in a system of N and counter N. Otherwise, outside these two definitions, an infinite sequence of communicative acts would be required, which is not possible for a norm giver, say in some legal act or something like this. Let us take another axiom. So if phi is obligatory and psi is obligatory, then their conjunction is obligatory. The translation in terms of norm set gives closure under conjunction. The translation in terms of counter set gives closure under at least one of conjuncts. These perfections are perfections for a norm recipient. A norm giver cannot express them, according to Verislav, in a norm promulgation, because also in this case, an infinite sequence of communicative acts would be required. And let us take a look at this third rule. If phi implies psi, then if phi is obligatory, then psi is also obligatory. In terms of norm set, we get closure under implication. In terms of counter set, we get closure under implicance. And actually, for similar reasons, these perfections are perfections for a norm recipient, not for a norm giver. However, as Verislav warns, a norm system and counter N can be imperfect because of being internally or externally inconsistent, or because of being anti-coherent, having explosiveness implying actually everything and phi. A response to imperfection are corrective second-order norms. For a norm giver, there is the way out of this imperfection is to revise a content. Norm giver can do this, revise a content of a law or some other act by restoring of consistency and at the same time maximally preserving the content condition. From the side of, from the viewpoint of norm recipient cannot revise the content, say, of a law or some other act. But he can and should revise logic in presence of, say, some inconsistency or other imperfection. Nor recipient should restore coherence by implying inconsistency-tolerant reasoning in presence of inconsistency. For example, dialectic logic, as was also mentioned in the previous. And at the same time, by preserving desirable logical properties, as we have seen, respective closures, perfections of the norm set and the counter set. So, in some overview, Berislav gives a general comparison of perfections in descriptive and normative theories taken in an idealized sense. So, descriptive theories, idealized in an idealized sense, do not have separative positive part or normative part and counterpart, whereas normative theory have or should have separate non-interdefinable positive norm part and counterpart. In descriptive theories, logic of the positive part should be a maximal filter. In a normative theory, only a filter. In a descriptive theory, logic of the counterpart should be an ideal. In a normative theory, only a weak ideal. In a descriptive theory, completeness of the positive part is a perfection. In a normative theory, it is not a perfection. And in descriptive theory, completeness of the counterpart is not a perfection, and in the normative theory, it is the perfection, but for a norm recipient. Let us now come to Gödel's ontology and to try to connect with this Berislav approach to actually to his view of relationship between descriptive and normative theory. Gödel's GO is actually, according to its intended meaning, moral aesthetic and thus normative. But it is also a descriptive ontological system. It has both normative as well as descriptive meaning. GO has all the perfections of a descriptive theory. Gödel's third order term of positivity is maximal, gapless, consistent. It is an absolute notion, whereas obligation norm set is related with separate permission norm counter set. So here, just for a brief reminder, what is GO? So quite standardly, this is actually Scott's some quite slight modification of this axiom. But here, for the purpose of the comparison and of the application of this idea about norm set and counter set. So, first axiom, X is positive, X, some property is positive if and only if non-X is not positive. Axiom 2 actually states closure under implication of positivity. Axiom 3 says that any number, even infinite number of positive properties is taken together positive. Then axiom 3, if a property is positive, it is necessarily positive. And axiom 5, necessary existence defined in a special way is also positive. The main theorem, Gödel's main theorem of this system is that being that possesses all positive properties, or we could say norm properties, if we want to put it together about this descriptive and normative side in Gödel's ontological system. So being that possesses all positive or norm properties exists. But this Gödel system is confronted, I mean, empirically in the literature with suggested revisions, mostly due to its necessitarian model collapse theorem. If phi, then necessarily phi is a theory of this system, or, for example, to exclusion of indifferent properties. So there are no properties such that neither x nor non-x is positive. Empirical intuitions based, say, on inductive reasoning from appearances on what may or may not be positive sometimes oppose a conceptual theory presented by GO, leading actually to what Berislav called external inconsistency. Now, instead of making a revision, if we adopt this Berislav approach, two sets approach, instead of making a revision of GO, we could extend GO by a counter theory of counterpositivity, not interdefinable with positivity. We could make the extension, introduce counter predicate of counterpositivity, and counter actions to extend GO to GO with counter theory, GO-CT. So, we could introduce such axiom or counter axiom 1, which actually states the closure under at least one conjunct. Axiom 2 actually expresses closure of counterpositivity under the implicant. Then we have C3, if X is positive, non-X is not counterpositive, so to put positivity and counterpositivity in some relation, but axiomatically, not quite automatically, logically. And C4, X is either positive, either counterpositive. And so, for example, if we want to find some solution to this intuition that model collects somehow does not function in real world as we experience it in our everyday life, we could simply put it, but as a counter axiom. Model collects as a counter axiom in contrast to the theorem, the corresponding theorem of the GO. And so we have separately defined extensions of P and counter P, interconnected by counter axioms 3 and 4. And we have allowed external inconsistency, external inconsistency. And so we can say that A axioms from this slide in a way express ideal conceptual aspect of Gödel's intended moral aesthetic ontology, and C axioms express empirical aspects in some broader sense, in empirical aspects of moral aesthetic ontology. In GO, we can prove the proposition that each theorem in GO is positive if we have full comprehension scheme. So closed formula can also be considered as a property. And then, on the ground of this, we can define counter theorem. Phi is a counter theorem if and only if GOCT implies that phi is counter positive. And so, as a consequence of this approach, we could have some counter theories of this system. So, if for a model collapse, if we wish if we wish it to be counterpositive, then because modal collapse follows from the conjunction of A axioms and full comprehension, then this conjunction should be actually counterpositive. Or we can approach, for example, in some restricted way, and put axiomatically, say, following Anderson axiom 1 or axiom 3 into or under this third order property of counter positivity. Also, what is interesting is this our Barkan formula and converse Barkan formula. There is a paper where he shows that imperatives cannot have a meaning if we have ontology regulated by Barkan formula and converse Barkan formula, because imperatives actually require that we produce a new object, or that they say we destroy some object. Thus, we need not revise in light of this theorems which seem to us to be counter-intuitive. We need not revise GO. Theory GO is preserved actually within GO with counter theory as a sub-theory, and is only complemented with the counter theory describing an inconsistency, antinomy tolerant whole. And so just a few words about semantics and some meta theory. So we can simply extend one of usual semantics for Gödel's ontological proof. So there will be models with an equivalent class for a first order term, lambda abstraction semantics, third order denotation of positivity, and now third order counter denotation assigned to this property of counter positivity. And we could simply apply semantic translation of this axiom C1 to C5. We actually see in this definition 2.2 that, for example, item 1 simply expresses semantically the closure under at least one conjunct, but semantically in terms of denotation of properties. Or that item 2, that this definition expresses preservation under implicant, and so on. And in item 2, we have this we have this modal collapse under lambda abstraction as abstract property put in the extension of counter positivity. And so we can define the concept of counter satisfaction, that phi is counter satisfied in a model and world W if the corresponding abstraction denotation is the member of the denotation of counter positivity. We define counter validity in a natural way on the ground of this definition, and then we could here is only a sketch which should be realized in full of soundness and completeness proof. Say for completeness proof, we can also apply one version of proving completeness for Gödel's ontological system. Say, for example, apply Gehling-style construction of possibility complete sequence W of worlds, which are saturated sets of sentences of extended language, and then extended with witnesses for constant, and then extended by counter theorems, and then define a canonical model. What would be here characteristic is this canonical semantics for counter-positivity, simply that the denotation of T is in the denotation of counter-positivity in some model M for C plus W and W, if and only if the sentence T is counter-positive, is a member of the W. And then we can define counter or satisfaction and counter satisfaction in analogous way as is usual in completeness proof. So that adding this case that phi is counter-satisfied in a model M for C plus W over W, if and only if this sentence phi is counter-positive, is member actually of the sentence of this world, which is actually a set of sentences. And so, because of this last C phi counter axiom that model collapse is counter-positive, if we wish to introduce it, this extended geo with counter theory system has features of historically seen of, but also systematically, features of a second fourth cosmological antinom. We have on the one side the world of necessity and positivity, so this core of the whole system actually GO, sub-theory, and on the other side we have the world of contingency and counter-positivity. That is, in some Platonic view, we have on the one side ideas, logical mathematical knowledge, deductive methodology, and on the other side we have the world of appearances, belief, empirical knowledge, and deductive methodology. The described counter theory allows for a contingent fact, which could be the starting point for a cosmological proof. And so we can put the conjecture that GOCT contains the possibility for a Gödelian cosmological proof as a counterpart of Gödel's ontological proof. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. And we are coming to discussion. Please, someone would like to put the question or comment. Please go on.
Professor, thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. Well, do you have any idea what would be the structure of those Gödelian cosmological proofs?
So, actually, I didn't think further how would be this structure. Actually, I thought that you could find this point interesting in some aspect of your work. But there, in Gödel's notices from his handwritten text, we can find some hints about this cosmological proof. So actually, Gödel had this idea for the possibility of a cosmological proof, but I'm not sure. Maybe new books are being edited presently. Maybe we will know more details about this. But what we know for sure, that Gödel has the idea of this cosmological proof, and what we should expect, that these two proofs somehow should be connected. And my guess is that in some such extended Gödel ontology content theory, there is a place for both and for interaction of both. But technically, how could we do it? I have no as yet precise idea, and I would be happy if you would perhaps someday like to think about this. And thank you very much for this question.
Thank you. And
this is future work.
Some other comments and questions? Please, Gabriela.
This is a really good example of what I was thinking about. It was my conjecture that is precisely Professor Jarvin's work on normative systems, which will issue further work on what he was working on. And it's interesting to see that this is an interesting new line. It's different from what these people are doing in philosophy of law. But it's very interesting to see that it somehow all is connected to what he was working on.
I would just like to add, Berislav was a reviewer of the book edited by Cordula Sviatorzecka on Gödel's ontological argument, and he carefully studied all the papers in this book, and this is certainly one. These papers in the book certainly made an influence on his thinking. Somewhere precisely at that time when he was working on these two sets normative systems. And another point is that at one of the last meetings we had with them, he actually gave us, there was Cordula and me who were at that time working or some year previously working on this ontological proof. He actually gave us some hints. His lecture was on these normative systems, but he gave us actually some hints. He had some idea that there should be some convergence with this, what we are doing, and his ideas about this normative system. So I think maybe this is at least one way to maybe realize his hints.